Budget touring bike, 6 things to look out for. Hello and welcome. For many would-be bicycle tourists, the touring bike is a major barrier standing in the way of their first major tour. When I say major tour, that means anything from a week-long adventure around your own region or country to crossing continents and even the world. Most will realize that extended tours like that will require you to sacrifice somewhere. It will be really tough to go on a bike tour after you've just spent $3,000 or more on a touring bike and some basic gear. That's why a budget touring bike makes sense, especially for those planning their first tour. Contrary to popular belief, you will not have to sacrifice ride quality when using an inexpensive used bike as long as you know what to look for in that bike before you buy it. Some of you may have seen my video, Touring Bike for Cheap, where I showed you my touring bike. I've used the same bike for touring since 2012 and it has worked so well that I have no desire to change it. This bike has survived a 3-month-long tour across Central America, a coast-to-coast tour in Canada, and several extended tours across parts of Colombia, not to mention countless short adventures here in Alberta. It's a keeper. As a matter of fact, if I had to replace it for any reason, I'd be looking for a very similar bike, not only to save money, but also because it has certain features you won't find on any bike currently on the market new. In this video, I will go through some of the key features to look for if you're in the market for a budget-friendly touring bike. Number 1. Let's start with the frame. If you have a good frame, everything else can be tweaked. The perfect material for a touring bike frame is steel. Not only does it have a good strength to weight ratio, it's also flexible enough to give you a comfortable ride without a suspension. Chromoly steel is especially good because it's stronger, even when the tubes are thinner, so the frame can be light as well. Up until the late 1980s, the most common way of making those frames was by using precast lugs to join the tubes that were brazed into them. A good quality frame from the mid to late 1980s can be ideal for touring, if it meets some other requirements. First, it has to fit you. Frame size is commonly measured in centimeters from the center of the bottom bracket to the top of the seat tube. A relatively simple guide for determining the correct frame size can be found on the website bikeexchange.com, linked in the description. I'd recommend going through the process of taking your measurements before you put your money down for a bike or a frame, unless you already know what bike size fits you. Second, for touring, you'll want a frame that has provisions for mounting racks and fenders. It'll be much easier to set up your bike if all you have to do is buy some standard racks and bolt them onto the bike instead of having to use special parts or even homemade brackets to install them. Third, you'll want to pay attention to the length of the chainstays. The longer they are, the easier it is to fit panniers on the bike. The bike's wheelbase will be longer, which also makes for a more stable ride with the load. Mountain bike frames from the 1980s were almost like road bikes, with only minor alterations for rough terrain. Such frames were built sturdy, and if you can find a quality one in good condition, I'd highly recommend this type. You can tell by the finish of the lugs if you're dealing with a high-end frame or a cheap department store one, as well as the type of the dropouts. Cheaper frames from that period have stamped dropouts that are pretty flat, while the better ones have thicker, forged ones. Another difference is weight. With higher quality chromoly steel being stronger, it allows for thinner tubing without losing stiffness. Always inspect your frame for alignment of the rear triangle. If it's out a few millimeters, it can be straightened on a steel frame. Another thing to check for are signs of collisions. A hard impact can sometimes cause the paint to flake off next to the joint, which isn't necessarily an issue by itself, but the frame would need to be checked more closely for cracks if such signs are found. Let's move on to number 2, the drivetrain. For touring, you need a good balance between speed and climbing capability. I know that newer bikes sometimes accomplish that with a 10 or 12 speed cassette on the rear wheel. You will not find that on an older mountain bike or an older touring bike. Instead, you'll have 3 chain wheels, while the rear cassette or freewheel only has 6 or 7 sprockets. The main thing here is that you have a good range that allows for climbing hills with a full load, as well as a fast speed on flat ground. I have never actually calculated my gear ratios, but you can find a calculator for that on the Sheldon Brown website. Factors are the wheel size, the number of cogs on both the chain wheels and the rear cassette, and even the length of the cranks. I found the original setup of a typical 18-speed 1980s mountain bike sufficient for touring, but highly recommend using a larger climbing gear. If your rear hub has a freewheel, meaning the cluster of sprockets has the ratcheting mechanism built in, all the sprockets are one unit and cannot be disassembled, I would recommend a freewheel like Shimano Mega Range. They are very common and come with 14 cogs on the smallest sprocket versus 34 on the large one, which is for climbing. There's nothing wrong with chain wheels made from steel, as they are very durable. But I would highly recommend a crank that allows you to replace individual chain rings. Those 18-speed setups are no longer popular today, but parts are easy enough to come by and cheap. This drivetrain also allows for the simplest form of shifters, which are friction thumb shifters. The reason I prefer these for touring is because of their simplicity. There's very little adjustment required when replacing a cable, and almost nothing can go wrong. Your thumb, not a perfect adjustment, controls shifting. If it ever gets thrown off by dirt from the road, for example, you can compensate without requiring any adjustment at all. Another important part of the drivetrain is the bottom bracket. I would highly recommend a so-called cartridge bottom bracket. They have completely sealed cartridge bearings that cannot be adjusted, but are very durable because dirt just doesn't get into those bearings, nor does the lubricant come out. You need a drivetrain that can go through all kinds of conditions without being affected. A simple 18 or 21 speed setup might be considered outdated by many bike experts today, but the system won't let you down if you're touring across remote areas. The only thing to keep an eye on is chain and sprocket wear. Maintain your chain and you'll go far with this drivetrain. Number 3, the wheels. Using an older bike for touring, you will most probably have rim brakes. This requires wheels with rims that are suitable for braking. Again, the type that the bike originally came with are likely ideal for touring as well. In the case of an old mountain bike, they will be 26-inch. The best rims have double walls and are made of aluminum alloy, making them both light and strong. It is very important to have good hubs as well. Again, I would recommend an aluminum hub that is well machined and has good seals. Examples are Shimano Diori 105 or Zuzui. My touring bike has the latter, and they actually have sealed cartridge bearings. I still run the same bearings as in 2012. You can service them when you remove the seals. It is important that you have 36 spokes per wheel, as this makes for a stronger wheel. When it comes to tires, you will find that everyone has their own preference they swear by. Cheap as I am, I've toured for months on second-hand mountain bike tires without any real problems, except, of course, some flats. I don't mind fixing those, but of course, occasionally this can be a pain. Schwalbe marathon tires are rumored to have excellent puncture resistance, but some will tell you they don't roll as easily as they like. Others swear by tubeless tires. Slime inside the tire is able to seal any puncture before the tire goes flat. To be honest, I have no experience with neither, which hasn't prevented me from enjoying great tours. My strategy is to carry a spare tube at all times and a spare tire when traveling long distances through remote areas. When it comes to knobby or smooth, I tend to pick something in between that gives me good traction on gravel and dirt without being too much of a drag on the road. The idea is to be prepared for any type of condition. If your bike has 700C tires, be sure to carry a spare when traveling in Mexico or Central America, possibly Africa. While 26-inch tires are available just about anywhere, the 700C ones are not. Alright, let's go to number 4 now. The brakes. Of course, brakes become even more important as you're loading weight onto your bike. Again, I would say that in general, old mountain bikes have good brakes for touring, but there are some things to be aware of. In the 1980s, cantilever brakes were popular, and they're still a good choice today. However, I've seen types that extend outward from the seat stay or the fork they're attached to so far that they're interfering with the panniers. You'll probably want to put panniers on your bike. You can convert those brakes quite easily to another kind of cantilever or V-brakes that are actually even stronger. I would say that V-brakes are the best type of rim brake you can have, and they use the same brazed-on bosses as cantilever brakes do. The only thing to keep in mind when making this conversion is that you'll need the brake handles that came with the V-brakes because their pull ratio differs from that of the cantilever brakes. Also, be aware of cheap quality V-brake arms that can bend easily and plastic brake handles. Always try to go for the highest quality parts you can afford. A good used part will be better than a brand new, cheap or substandard one. If you're not sure what a cheap V-brake looks like, go to Walmart and look at the $100 bikes. They all come with V-brakes, and some of the parts are relatively thin, stamped steel. Don't put anything like that on a touring bike. Number 5. Now let's talk racks and fenders. Well, since this is still the budget bike we're building or preparing, I recommend you go for something basic that can hold a pannier on each side and a load on top as well. Most importantly, they are supported near the dropouts on each side and on the seat stays or a bridge between the two seat stays. For a front rack, it's the same way. The rack is attached to the fork. When you try to buy a front rack in a store, you'll likely be offered a bag full of aluminum rods and hardware. This is called a lowrider rack. Some love those and swear by them. However, if you're touring on rough roads and in countries that don't always have perfect infrastructure, stay away from them. I used to tour with lowrider racks, and it is really annoying when they break, and they do. The advantage of a lowrider rack is that your center of gravity is lower, making the bike easier to control. However, usually you carry smaller panniers in the front, and you can load your lighter stuff in there, like clothing and dirty laundry. A rack that attaches at the top of the fork along with your fender bracket as well as near each dropout is much stronger than something that only holds on at the bottom. Another advantage is that all your panniers are about the same height. Some rivers in certain countries don't have bridges going across. You may have to push your bike through water. With those lowrider racks, it can mean that you'll have to take them off and carry them across the river, unless of course they're 100% waterproof. About the fenders. If you can, go for aluminum ones with fender stays. I guess I'm really old and perhaps we were spoiled back in the old days, but I remember times when bikes actually came with such fenders. Ever since then, there are a huge number of different plastic contraptions on the market, but none of them come even close to the traditional ones we used to have. They're either prone to breaking and other types of deformation, or they only protect half of what they should. Either way, it's a pain. But one thing is sure, any fender is better than no fender. Not just to keep you clean, but also to keep dirt off your bike where it matters. Finally, number 6 is your seat and your handlebars. Besides frame size, those are the main things that make your bike comfortable. When you're buying a used bike to go touring, be prepared to spend money on a new seat. Actually, be prepared to spend a good portion of your budget on the seat that works best for you. I personally swear by a Brooks B17 leather seat. Having tried several padded seats before the Brooks, I had never been truly comfortable on long distances. At times I had raw skin on my butt. It was so bad. Some will tell you to buy bib shorts and grease your butt. If you use a Brooks that's broken into your individual shape, you won't need any of that. However, some will probably dispute that. There's no one-fits-all solution. Another seat that works for me is a Tioga Spider type. I've thoroughly tested a knockout by the name Kebi. You may have to experiment with the seat. As for the handlebars, it's somewhat similar. I tend to sit very upright on my bike. My handlebar adjustment and the seat adjustment reflects that. It does not work for everyone. Especially road cyclists are used to a lower seating position, so they use different stems and drop handlebars. We had a bit of a problem making Barbara's bike more comfortable for her, and one solution was this adjustable stem that can bring her handlebars a bit higher up and closer toward her. Bike fitting is its own niche within the bike industry, and both the seat and handlebar positions play key roles here. For touring, I would always put comfort ahead of performance. So if you do go to a bike fitter, make sure he understands what you're planning to do. The bike fit for winning a race will look different from that for cycling across your country in a relatively leisurely way. So let's summarize the 6 things you should look out for. Number 1, a good quality steel frame. Number 2, a drivetrain that is both simple and reliable while giving you all the gear ratios you need for both climbing hills with a load and going fast on flat ground. Number 3, high quality wheels that are built strong and light while suited to the brakes you have on your bike. Number 4, you need good brakes. You need good brakes with your touring bike. Disc brakes are the best, but rim brakes can be almost as good. Go for the V brakes if you're spending money for converting. Cantilever brakes are okay too. Number 5, when it comes to racks and fenders, make sure they are attached at the top and on both sides. A converted rear rack is often the best front rack. And number 6, pick the right seat and handlebar combination for you. The seat, stem, and handlebars can change the feel of a bike like day and night. You may have to experiment to find your sweet spot. Overall, an old mountain bike that was built way before they had suspensions might be a good place to start. I hope this video helps you build or set up your perfect touring bike while leaving enough money in the bank to actually experience a great tour. Happy trails, my friends!
Jörg Schlagheck.
The one and only.